I want to give a special thank you to our sponsor for this evening and the DDS series, Interior Tech. We appreciate their support, and without the support of our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to offer programming like this at no cost. That is the end of my intro. Daniel, I'll turn this over to you so that you can take over and introduce yourself to the crowd. Thank you very much for joining us. And I can't wait to hear it. We've had some really good presentations so far, so very excited to hear yours tonight.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for everybody that's trickling in here on Zoom. I see some familiar names. Yeah, very excited. This project I'm going to share with you was done while working for other firms, as I tried to kind of get my foothold into really this project, and along with one other one that I kind of did on the side, allowed me to start my office just a little under 4 years ago. So it's an important project, and there was a tremendous amount of lessons learned. Because you're all architects, I've tried to save the glossy images till the end and really try and focus on some of the things that I learned through the process of realizing this project. Just a little background, my office, Daniel Toole Architecture, we're almost 4 years old, small but mighty team of 3, including myself, and mainly a mix of single family and now getting into some mixed use and multifamily here in Portland, and just got our emerging small business so that we can try and hopefully team up with some other like-minded firms throughout the state. And we have our first California house, hopefully going to break ground over the winter as well. So growing slowly but surely, but this house definitely set the base for everything that we do. So I'll just get into the presentation and talk a little bit about, make sure the Zoom bar is gone. Okay. Yeah, so this project began back in probably around 2009, 2010, when I graduated from the University of Oregon in the middle of the recession. There was no work here in Portland, so I moved to Seattle to work for a larger corporate firm, and was invited by a non-architect friend over to a barbecue in a backyard, probably within the first couple months of living in Seattle, where I met his parents. And yeah, it took about 12 years, but basically I heard his mom, who's Swiss, my friend's mom, say, one day I want to take our garden and I want to subdivide our lot and I want to build a concrete house to retire into. So that was literally around 2009, 2010. And now fast forward 12, 14 years later, the house is done. But I remember that night at the barbecue thinking, like, I've got to do that house. How many people want to do a concrete house, and are from Switzerland and have that, level of architecture as a baseline. So that's kind of the origin of the story. And I'll show you some pictures of the site before we started to work on it. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the principles that that come up on every single project, and just in general discussion here in the office, and when I've gotten the chance to teach at the University of Oregon. These are themes and kind of almost obsessions that guide every single one of our projects, and they're constantly changing a little bit. But just as a introduction, I think that the concept of sanctuary is very important to everything we do, no matter the typology, no matter the context, and its relationship to or through nature. I think we've had the opportunity to do some projects out in very diverse landscapes, from the Pacific Northwest forests and coastlands to the high desert of Joshua Tree in California now recently. And really this notion of architecture with the ultimate goal of sanctuary and just a place of peace away from the busyness of the world. And then as far as order, seeking an order for a project and seeking what, given the material and architectural context, what that order wants to be and how can we give it its voice. And when we successfully listen to what that ordering wants to be, there's no question that it brings a sense of dignity to a project. The project we're going to look at today had probably the highest budget that we've been fortunate to deal with per square foot. And there's been a lot of stuff since then that hasn't had, this price point. But learning, cutting our teeth on this project and realizing that there are a lot of fundamental things that if there's a certain intensity brought to that pursuit of order, it can bring dignity to any price point project. I think that's a really important thing we've learned in the last few years. This project specifically, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I spent a year in grad school in Berlin later on, and then most recently, before moving back to Portland about 6 years ago, I was in Tucson, Arizona, working for Rick Joy for a year. And so I think the combination of being in the American Southwest and in Berlin is very different architectural cultures of massiveness and thick walls and just things that have stood the test of time and weathered in a very different way from how I was brought up here, where everything is very much so about the individual pieces, mostly from our timber culture. Just so this project was really a first essay of like, how do I come back to the Northwest and try to use the materials that are familiar here, but instead of resorting to building up layers of individual units, trying to achieve a sense of mass through a tectonics that's a little bit different than the post and beam frame or a highly articulated steel or wood construction. So that's harder to do when you're stuck with 2x framing, which I've learned the last 3.5 years. But just pay attention to some of the things that I'll talk about in trying to bring a sense of mass to this project in its structure and the way that things are detailed. The work of Isamu Noguchi is something that for a very long time has been a preoccupation for me. You have two pieces of his on the left and then a piece by Brancusi, his kind of mentor, on the right. And these sculptures there's a certain thing that is, they're letting material speak in a poetic way that's almost how that material might speak in nature, but it's passed through, the devices of tectonics, of mass, of an order inherent to each individual piece. And I think that there's something, it's kind of hard to put into words, but there's something very powerful about Noguchi's body of work, particularly, that he's able to distill so much into one material and one approach to tooling that material to make something new. And I think that's something we use as a North Star in our work. And also the work of J.B. Blanc, and then on the right, the Oregon mid-century sculptor Leroy Setzel. There's certain qualities in these sculptural works with materials that influence us across the board. So the Madrona House was completed in 2021. And like I said, the story really begins in 2010, when I moved to Seattle in 2008, but began talking with this family in 2010 about their future home. So just for context, on the west, here is the Puget Sound. the downtown Seattle, Space Needle up here at South Lake Union. And then there's a large hill, Capitol Hill, and some other hills in between. And then on the downhill slope towards Lake Washington, you have the neighborhood of Madrona. The Madrona House is here. And if we have time at the end, I'll show a little bit of basically the sequel to this house, which is for the builder of the Madrona House. And we call that the Tree House, and that's down here in the Leschi neighborhood. But you can kind of see the Madrona House occupies basically the edge of a steep slope that then juts right down to Lake Washington. So this is very much how the house and the site looked when I first began to socialize with this family. This is a 1910 colonial house here on the left, and their garage on the right, and then there was a brick wall that they had built. They had built it before many zoning cycles ago, so they were able to build this kind of garden wall probably about 30 years ago, just to give some protection to the garden that was behind here, where many of my Seattle friends grew up playing. So pretty funny when the project actually started to turn into a project. Everyone was like, once you start digging, any Legos must be returned to this address. So then this is kind of the most iconic memory I have of this particular place. Whenever I'd go over there for some sort of event, a barbecue, coffee, you would come in from the busy main street and down this side street, and then you go through this gate, and there was this kind of very special little almost French formal garden that then took you, rather than going in the front door, you go down to the end and you can see Lake Washington there at the end of the view on the left. And to the left was their house. And it's just something that always stood out to me, that you would enter into their kind of kitchen and living room rather than like a more formal entry. There is a more formal entry, but nobody ever used that door when going to this existing house. And then on the right, when you're walking down this brick walk, was the garden. And this garden was lush. You can see the drop off is about 60 feet down on the back of the property, down to kind of the coastal, or the kind of immediate flatter parts of the site that then drain off into Lake Washington. But there is this incredibly steep drop off here behind the planter boxes. This is a view from their house looking down into this empty area. And this might not seem very special, but in the neighborhood of Madrona and really Leschi and many, the Central District, many of the surrounding neighborhoods, it's incredibly rare to find a lot with this much open area. And many times they were offered to have this lot split and purchased by people that drove by and saw it. But they held out because they knew that one day they wanted to, once the kids were out of the house, that they'd like to downsize and build a modern home. So the project we're going to talk about occupies what once was the lawn. And you can see the steep slope drop off to the right, and then their house there in black, which they sold that house after splitting the lot, and the sale of that house is what financed the building of the Madrona House. So one thing that was unique about this project, and I do have to mention that they had been working with a neighborhood architect previously, and for one reason or another, it just was not working out. And I was studying abroad in Berlin at the time, and they were visiting family in Switzerland. They stopped through Berlin and showed me the plans, and they were just like, we're not really, what we're coming up with is not really working. What do you think about it? And I proposed, why don't I do this? Why don't you let me take a pass at this project, and I will do it in partnership with a mentor of mine and a good friend, Karsten Stinn, who is one of my greatest mentors. So we did the design, the schematic design phase together, and he was very busy with other projects, so he kind of had to step out after that. But I want to show a little bit of the design process once we kind of inherited the program that they had thought about. And I don't have a picture of the plans from the previous architects, but basically what we did, there was just a lot going on, a lot of materials, a lot of moves, and it's a very small site, very hemmed in on two sides by neighbors. So we just first thing we did was really try to distill the plan to what we thought was essential, and then um, I suggested that we pick a material order for the project, and there were three initial concepts. One was um, an all steel house, uh, and then just the rusted steel would go well with the existing brick wall. It had been decided from the beginning that we would keep as much as possible of that kind of pre-current zoning permitted brick wall, just because you can't do a privacy wall that close to the sidewalk anymore with current zoning in Seattle. That we would surgically operate on it and keep it. And I thought the rusted steel would go good with the older brick. And then there was an all concrete option on the bottom right, which I have to say was my favorite. And then there was kind of a all concrete ground floor with a charred wood upper for the more visible part of the house, just because this is primarily a historic neighborhood, and trying to soften the house's modernity while still getting away with a lot of concrete. And that's kind of what we ended up on, that final scheme, the black charred wood upper and the concrete lower. I was fighting pretty hard for the all concrete house, and with how much the reality of budget inflation and concrete logistics, and having the whole project shut down for many months due to COVID and supply chain issues. Probably in hindsight, good that we didn't try and do an all concrete house with these cantilevers. But nonetheless, it's fun to look back on some of these early concepts. And I was living in Tucson, Arizona at the time, working for Rick Joy. So I would fly up once a month and meet with the clients or check in on Zoom throughout the design and permitting process. So these are kind of like end of schematic design renderings. I just thought it's fun to show some of everything looks a little floppy and awkward compared to the final product, but it's interesting to see the design progression. One key item, both the husband and wife are at the beginning of this were on the verge of retirement. Now they're both retired. For a two-story house, just because both of them had some foot and leg surgeries prior, they really wanted to always be able to stay in this house. So aging in place was a key concept. There is a bathroom. Basically, the house is divided into two bars. On the left side is the living, dining, kitchen. And then the middle is the entry vestibule, the covered entry, and the courtyard beyond that looks out at the lake. And then on the right is the service bar and stair with two bedrooms on top of it. Now at the north end of that service bar, there's an office. They also really didn't want the TV in the living room, which I appreciated once you see the concrete fireplace. So that's a movie room, a work room, but also the dimensions of that room were carefully done so that if for some reason one of them or both of them need to live on flat ground, that office can be converted into the master suite, which you can see here. And then what is a pantry currently, where the X is actually the foundation is fully in place for an elevator, should that need to be dropped in through the roof later. But working with our structural engineer, it just seemed, given that they want to live in this house forever, we wanted to make the installation of an elevator easy in the future, and not a costly redo of the foundation in that portion of the house where you'd have to rip out walls around it, etc. So everything is sized where they would just need to cut the roof and lower an elevator in and then patch the area over that. But right now it's a pantry, and on the second floor, a closet. So then keeping the brick wall, or 75% of it, allowed us to create this kind of entry garden, as well as like a kitchen garden, which is on the north, is to the left on this plan. And I think a key issue was, given how close the neighbors are, which you'll see on the site plan, um, how can we maximize the outdoor space? This couple spends almost the entire year outside, even on cooler days. The windows are flung open. They really like to live as if they're outside as much as possible. So how can we provide a variety of outdoor spaces? Some with overhangs protecting them, some that are on the western side of the building, and some that are on the eastern side at the steep slope drop off, for gardening, for kitchen, basic herbs, vegetables, and then also pretty extensive green roofs that you'll see. This is kind of in the middle of the design process, just looking at materiality, and we decided to go for not a smooth concrete, but a very rough board form concrete, to be kind of something to give even more heft and weight to the walls in the house, juxtaposed against smooth concrete slab and what ended up being white oak carpentry throughout the project. So you can see we're down to, on the north, to their existing house, which is now owned by someone else. The zoning code minimum was 8 feet in the city of Seattle, or 8'6". It's enough to fit like one compact car parking spot. Nobody's opened the fence up to do that, but you can see how close the houses are in general in the neighborhood. But once our house was added in here, it's extremely tight. North is up here, and the 2 bedrooms on the second floor are at the south. So that's where in our Pacific Northwest sunshine starved climate, that's where you'd want to get the light from. So that opened up a challenge of how do we access light when basically our north and south facade are completely blocked by much larger houses. And the courtyard does some of that, but you'll see some interesting things we did to open the roof to diffuse south, east, and west light in deeper into the house plan. Here's the house's built plan. Again, entry, vestibule, coat closet, and then a courtyard beyond in the middle, and dining and kitchen on the west as one open space with the living room. And the living room and the courtyard are given definition by this massive double aspect hearth with one fireplace facing into the living room, one fireplace facing into the courtyard. And then there's a covered seated area looking out over Lake Washington there to the north, with a little barbecue area. And you have, the hillside kind of wild garden on the page up, and on the page down is a more formal entry garden that utilizes that brick wall. And on the east, the service bar is the darker area where you have garage, the elevator / pantry, mechanical room under the switchback stair, and then a laundry room before the office / future bedroom. And upstairs, you have the guest bedroom on the street side with its own balcony and bath. And then on the hillside, you have the master suite with a very large or larger bathroom. And then this space here, if you can see my cursor, that's where the elevator could go. But right now, this is just general, the constant complaint for modern architecture. There's not a lot of storage room. That whole room is 10 feet tall and totally full of storage. So this cross section is critical, opening the courtyard, but then also making these cuts in the roof here at the north side and here at the south side. These entire walls facing the neighbors are opaque. So driving light deep down in by bouncing it into the section was a key move. Sustainable strategies, the roof is all pre-wired for solar. We used a radiant ceiling system rather than a radiant slab. So here in the 2-story volume, you'll see hydronic pipes radiate heat using water like you'd use in a radiant slab. You have natural lighting during the day. Most of the time, they're not using electronic lights because of how much light is in here. The green roof for stormwater treatment, and then every room, including the skylight over the stair, has operables in it. I'd say almost every single room has 2 operables, so cross ventilation on that hillside can be utilized. This is a model that we did after the house was completed, just to kind of capture the purity of the concept and just as a way to kind of reflect on the project for our work moving forward. That charred upper and the cast concrete base. This is the part that I'm excited to share because I've never really talked about this before, but this is a steep slope. Most hillside slopes in Seattle are critical areas because of soft earth. There's been a tremendous amount of fill making these hillside neighborhoods in Seattle over the years. So the first thing we had to do was send soldier piles 25 feet deep to the south to retain all this built up area around the neighbor's house, lagging just to get a flat site. And then all our foundations, you can see how large these get under some of our heavier elements like the hearth. I think it was at about a 48-inch spacing. We have 20-foot deep pipe piles down into the earth, basically to stabilize this whole site and just get it ready for a new house. So that was a tremendous amount of learning on how to deal with a soft site, a landslide prone neighborhood. And we've had no problems with it, but it was pretty eye-opening to spend a significant amount of money before there's even any visible building out of the ground. And a basement, there was a basement suite in here that was quickly value engineered out. These were concrete mock-ups to start to really get at the texture that we wanted, and we ended up using something closer to the left side where the cedar boards were left. They were not sanded on the right. Can't really see in this image, but we tried some sanding of the grain. And what we ended up doing was just leaving all the rough saw marks in the boards that line the concrete. And the forms, you'll see the formwork. Once the formwork was in place, because these were so big, those boards started to dry and shrink a little bit. So when the concrete was poured, you'll see there were these fins that were irregularly placed on the joint lines of the forms everywhere. Contractor freaked out when they stripped the first wall and sent me pictures. I was like, no, that looks awesome. Like, keep that. I think highlighting using concrete as the finish and the structure simultaneously required a tremendous amount of coordination for things like low voltage. These are light switches that had to all be located in the forms very early in the project. All the plumbing in the walls, every light switch, every outlet, J-box, everything had to be coordinated and, of course, correlated to the rebar spacing. And these are 10'6" tall walls on the ground floor. The fireplace is about 14 feet tall. That's the rebar for the double-sided fireplace in the formwork prior to pouring it, which was impressive in itself. And this is one of the first pours. That's the living room wall. The client very happy with it. All the steel receiving plates had to be coordinated in here. And this is one of the walls that actually goes up through the roof. And you'll see probably my favorite detail in the whole project is a skylight against this wall that bounces south light into the living room. So this is looking out to the eventual view with that double-sided fireplace at the right, and then the skylight wall that I mentioned at the left. And you'll see that the walls are made up. The wall assembly looks like it's monolithic concrete, but really there's a much more layered buildup for those. And this was one of the first walls that was stripped, and you can see all these bandsaw marks in the boards, and leaving the cedar boards that were used to cast against to weather. And we did recycle them at least once throughout forming up all the pieces of the house. And you see when the board shrank, the concrete oozed between the opened up joints in the boards, but very inconsistently. So you get this beautiful texture when the sun is directly east or west that really adds a depth to the entire house on the inside and the outside. So as I was mentioning, there is a six-inch concrete structural wall that's doing all the work. And then there's a 4-inch veneer wall. And the relationship of these two walls, if the structural one is inside or outside, kind of changes depending on what is tying into it, be it a steel beam, be it framing, traditional timber framing that we did for the bedrooms above, or a beam that's handling a larger span. This happens to be a cut section through my favorite moment in the house, where we have that large skylight in the living room with the appearance of a monolithic piece of concrete. And between the concrete is how you meet energy code, with 4 inches of rigid polyiso and then a fluid applied waterproofing membrane that you can see being caulked between the insulation and the water, or actually this is being patched around rebar holes. But there was a tremendous amount of coordination required to make this look like simple cast in place walls. Basically all the current Washington Energy Code, even back then, is a little bit more stringent than Oregon's. I think we were able to get an R23 with insulation and the R value of the concrete itself. And then you can see how the charred timber rain screen is very carefully flushed out with the concrete in all cases to really achieve that sense of mass that had been a goal from the outset of the project. So the orange is a Prosoco Cat 5 fluid applied waterproofing membrane. And we learned a lot about how you cannot apply that in the cold because it balls up, etc. With the insulation, then kind of shish kebabbed onto the ties, and then there's a whole other wall cast against that. So just keep that in mind, because the photos definitely do not show all the inner layers of the wall. So that is literally, this is a cross section literally through this place here, which is just a incredible, almost vitrine for people to sit on, for art, for light. And like I said, during the day, even on an overcast day like today, there's probably not a light on in the living room, and you're just constantly registering the sky and the atmosphere of the clouds passing over and the sun creeping through occasionally. It's just an incredible space, and I'm very happy that it ended up being the place where they spend most of the time. So here you can see the hydronics of the radiant ceiling and the beginnings of the deck for the courtyard space. This is Phil, the amazing builder who, to be honest, we'd interviewed all the best high-end custom single family modern contractors and that I could find. And after 5 interviews, the clients called us and were like, we're going to go with a guy that remodeled our kitchen 15 years ago. I was like, does he have a website? No, he doesn't have a website, but he'll figure it out. We're just like, it was a little maddening, but he has actually turned out to be the most incredible builder I've ever worked with. And I'll show you a couple pictures of his house, which is under construction now, one neighborhood to the south. The stairs and that skylight that has a venting leaf for stack ventilation. This is the stair and that light coming from the south. If you were to pop a hole in that wall, you could like reach over and grab a cup of coffee from the neighbor from their kitchen. So just really turning all the windows on these much closer facades up to the sky has had a tremendous impact on all these key spaces through the house that really need the light. There it is in its finished state. And that skylight is on a rain sensor, so it's open most of the time. It's on a temperature sensor and a rain sensor. So if it starts raining, skylight will close and stack ventilation will stop. But the passive ventilation and cooling in here works very well. This is just a demonstration of Phil's craft. This happens to be the other corner of the street side facade, but these are two pieces of the charred Sugibon siding, and he felt like a butt joint was not appropriate, that a biscuited miter joint would be better. So this is probably a 18-foot long miter joint sitting in the living room on a rainy day, gluing up. And you can see its smaller sibling here on the one-story corner facing the street. And the most incredible thing, I mentioned how great it would be if the Sugibon siding, the charred upper siding above this quarter-inch reveal here, how great it would be if we could line the joints up with the concrete form boards. And I did not think that that would be possible, or if it was possible, maybe in a small area, but Phil really took it as a challenge. So probably every fourth or fifth board on this entire house has been ripped and re-shiplap jointed to get those lines consistently lining up. And it's not super apparent in some of the larger photos, but when you're in and around the house, you can feel the order of those two systems coming together and getting all, like I was saying, the framing, the steel, the 2x6 framing, the waterproofing, the insulation to all perfectly flush out everywhere on the exterior was a true challenge, but it is something that you appreciate when you encounter the house. So we were able to preserve most of the brick wall. You can see we had to cut it wider for the garage and then cut a gate into it. And this is right after, well, the very last thing was the clients, as always the case, money was dwindling towards the end of the project. So they really took on the green roof installation. The green roof was grown down here in Portland. If anybody needs the manufacturer, I can look it up at the end, but that's one of the clients there happily installing the green roof, and they figured out all the irrigation, even on the little shed overlooking the lake down here. That was the mock-up for the green roof, and they just took a lot of joy in diving in and getting their hands dirty with the construction process. So I'll close with some finished photos of the house. You can just see really trying to limit the palette and let the concrete do as much of the work as possible. And the landscape here is probably some of these trees are now up to the lower roof line, which is just beautiful. The more lush this gets, and the more aging cycles, the better, definitely the better it looks. This is through the entry garden. It's a nice collection of different Japanese maples that you move through to the entry. Coming in the entry with the lake beyond and the courtyard there, and they host a lot of dinner parties in the summer. So these windows stack in the middle, and then you can circulate on both sides around them. And the ceilings down here are 10-6. So even with a compact plan and a basically opaque north and south elevation, the house feels very grand down in these living spaces. And you can see that skylight wall here in the living room beyond. The kitchen was done by Leicht, which is a German company that had a studio in Seattle. So coordinating all the metric pieces of the kitchen that was made in Germany and then sat in a warehouse in Seattle for a year while we dealt with COVID delays and finishing construction. The tolerances turned out really well. You can see down to getting our 1/2-inch reveals correct. And that's a view with the heroic hearth there and the lake beyond, in a covered area where they like to have their coffee in the morning. The courtyard out window, just some details of that fireplace. And these fireplaces, literally someone got down and inside the chimney of the fireplace to install these. And you can see the changing light quality. This photo hints at the kind of bluer, cooler skylight on the top And this is an early morning shot where you have the warm light of the sunrise juxtaposed against that cool, just diffuse light from the sky. And they have a nice collection of things that they've gathered in travels around the world that they I think they still haven't hung art on the concrete walls because they feel like the concrete is too precious, even though they were worried that it was too rough when the first wall got stripped. And that's the kitchen garden back out there. Hurry through these.
Daniel, we have a question from David saying, was the second story massing a response to any zoning regulations, or was this purely a programming / formal study? Parentheses, private versus public spaces of the house.
That I think there were two things. One, they wanted to have the better view over the lake by placing the bedrooms on the south side. And two, because they're closer to their own house on the north side, I think that in order to be able to sell their old house, they didn't want to build a giant black box looming 8 feet from all the windows of the bedroom and living room on that side. So that decision had kind of already been made when I started on the project, that they really wanted to occupy the south side of the site. But then the challenge was, how do we get light into the house given that? And that's a sunset view out to the lake. And just really quick, here's a few images of Phil's house, which is very different. It's a post and beam house. All has to be carried uphill. That's his old house here that we have replaced with this new all fir post and beam house that's under construction now. All exposed structure, all fir, everything. There's Phil, and the view from his view of the same lake, but to Mount Rainier. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for presenting, Daniel. Do you have any, does anyone from the audience want to ask any questions? And feel free to chat or unmute yourself to ask. All right, I'm not seeing anything coming through.
Okay.
Daniel, it was an excellent presentation. We really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
So we have a question. It says, how did the thermal mass perform?
The thermal mass, I think the thermal mass, I was looking it up because I figured it would be good to remind myself about that. The wall section, the main goal was to have a concrete house. So then we tried to make the concrete also perform as structure. I think the thermal performance of the concrete, we knew in order to meet energy code, we would really need to rely on the polyiso insulation to do its job. And I think that concrete probably added maybe 2 or 3 to the R value. But that being said, in summer, it is incredibly cool in there until, in a week where we have really hot days, day after day after day, it takes a couple days for the heat to even get into the house. And it has performed really well. I think the therm and the cross ventilation mixed with these super thick walls, especially to the south, has worked incredibly well. I'd say the one area that I maybe would, in hindsight, have proposed doing like a triple glaze or integrating some kind of better shading would have been at the kitchen at the west facing windows, even though these are pretty high performance thermally broken aluminum windows. But yeah, the concrete, everything works great. It does not work great for cell phone reception.
All right, we
So
have a few.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul. Are you going to read the other chat questions?
Yes. Next one is, did using concrete for interior walls affect, or excuse me, that was, let me just, did we using concrete for interior walls affect the thermal properties? I don't know if you spoke to that in full, Daniel, but I'll let you defer to you on that.
Yes, it did add. Concrete doesn't exactly have the highest R value, just a monolithic pour of concrete, but it, besides being the desired finish and materiality of the house, it does add to the thermal mass of the wall, just because there's more mass there.
Totally. Did you operate totally solo, or did you have some design team members?
Um, so like I said, I designed it in collaboration with a mentor and friend, Karsten Stinn, and then he had to focus. Both of us had day jobs. So then as I got through permitting, I got a little bit of help from an enclosure consultant, and then Jason in my office lent a tremendous hand with construction documents. That wall section that we looked at was by his hand. And thankfully, I ended up moving back to Oregon to work at Allied Works, and Jason came from Rick Joy's as well and ended up working at Allied Works. And then once I had started my office and had enough work, he was able to come on with me. And also Akos Hubert is in our office too, and he helped a lot with a lot of these graphics. And the photo session at the very end, that was a big learning lesson. That was a tremendous amount of work to get the house ready to photograph. And yeah, we were a great team, and we all learned a lot from this house that permeates everything we do now.
Great. Thanks for sharing. One last question here. Did working with a small scale builder result in more CA time?
No. I mean, the CA on this house, which was a real culture shock when I moved back to Oregon, and my main job was a museum at Allied Works, where super formal RFI, CCD, ASI process with Phil, who I'm going to talk to right after this because he has some questions for his house. It's all through text and call and just walk in the site with him on weekends. So I would say we're able to focus on really critical issues without all the time spent on, RFI and submittal formal review. I mean, I would not apply that to every builder. I really got lucky with Phil. He's like a master craftsman. I think that some builders that are not skilled like that, you want the more formal CA process because then things don't fall through the cracks. But I think that's a case by case scenario question, but very fortunate to have found Phil.
I guess I'll add on one question because I think it's important to ask. Is there anything you've taken away from this project that you continue to use that you think other people would benefit knowing?
Yeah, like when you believe in the design and the direction and your concept and your details are all integrated, there's so much abstraction between yourself, your mind, the builder, the client, between our drawings. And when you actually get into the construction process and money is flying out of people's bank accounts and time is passing by and things inevitably go behind schedule, I think developing a good diplomatic attitude towards trying to make sure that things don't get compromised and thinking very quickly, even if all of a sudden you have half the budget that you thought you had for a certain portion of the house, I think just learning how to fight for the architecture is the biggest thing that I took from this house. And of course, there are things that I over detailed, or things that I under detailed, or things that I didn't really fully think about and thought, oh, it'll just get resolved or whatever. And then it did not get resolved in a beautiful way. There's a lot of lessons learned there, but I think the biggest thing is just to be persistent and learn how to keep everybody on your team and the client side and the builder in a positive relationship, and just keep the communication open, but really fight for the rigor of your concept. I think that's the biggest thing that I took from this, and that skill is critical. That can make or break a building from becoming a building versus architecture that hopefully we all strive for.
And then it looks like Kristen came in at overtime with, are there any special considerations that should be kept in mind with Shugiban siding?
This, I didn't really mention this. This was from Delta Millworks. It's a Koya, which is a pre-acetylated wood, because the clients, you know, they're now in their early 70s and they didn't want to be having to climb around the building and refinishing it. So this particular siding is kind of a much lower maintenance because the wood is pickled after it's charred on the outside and then sealed. So I know, just talk to whoever you're thinking about having supply your Sugibon and find out how it's finished. And if maintenance is key, you know, if it's on an institutional or commercial building, especially, there's a lot of different options to get that look, but have something that is more robust and a longer term finish like that. I will say that when that stuff arrived, it was a little slick. It had like a sheen to it, not in a good way. Like it almost looked plasticky because of the sealing process. You know, I wanted like a rough, charred, you know, like it looked like it just got burned wall. And when I saw how kind of glossy it looked, it worried me a lot. But after about a month after it was hung, you know, it gets, with the atmosphere and rain, it looks fine. But yeah, there's so many options in the marketplace for varying finishes on Sugibon, and for the wood substrate itself that receives that char.
Great. Any more overtimers? I know last time they poured in right like a minute after I requested, so I'm gonna give us one more minute and then we can
Okay.
head off.
Yeah, great questions. It's fun to think about all these issues because the house has been done for 3 years now, and thankfully I don't get any calls like, why'd you do this concrete? How are we going to live in this? It's mostly like, can we add an umbrella on the roof? Can we do this? Like, that's the hard part, getting all the things that you didn't think about to look nice and integrated.
Okay, well, I think we can give everyone their night back. I don't think that any more questions are coming in, but we really appreciate you being here, Daniel. And thank you for everyone who joined us this evening. And thank you, Paul, doing a great job moderating.
Thanks.
All right, have a good night, everyone.
Okay. Night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right. Thank you.
Daniel, can I ask you a quick question? Sorry.
Yeah,
We are planning on doing some on-demand CE education. Could we use the recording from this video for that?
for sure. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And then I have a question too, just because I'm try to collect them as much as possible. Can I get 1 credit for this?
I'm gonna talk to Kathy about that. I'm not
Okay.
certain. I don't know. Let's see. I would put a dubious no.
Okay.
Middle no. Middle no.
I've done a presentation a couple years ago, and there's like there is a correlation when you do give presentations that you can get credit.
Okay.
So it's worth trying.
I will try for you, and I will get back to you in some capacity, or someone else will.
Yeah, that sounds good. All
Great.
right.
Great
Thank you.
presentation. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.